Howdy, everyone. Well, I've got the various reinforcement patches now, fuel tank sealed and clecoed in place. There's one there. This is on the front nose piece. The same one there for the other side. And I've already talked about how I came about getting these in place as far as what I use. They're just scrap pieces left over from the leg fairings. There's another one in there. These longer, skinny ones, I had to use a clamp in the middle just to make sure that they were making good contact with the fuel tank sealant in the middle there. So, like I said, just leftover scrap pieces from the gear leg fairings, and they're like I've said, they're bonded, so to speak, with fuel tank sealant. I like fuel tank sealant. Just because it's flexible. And I know these wheel pants are going to get beat up a lot. Being down on the end of the landing gear there's going to be a lot of vibration, a lot of movement. So I thought that this might work. We'll see if in fact I'm correct. But anywho, these are going to stay like they are for at least a week or so. I just want to make sure that the fuel tank sealant is nice and set before I start fooling around with them any further. But the next step would be to refit these back onto the airplane and then final drill all of these holes to final size and then actually get them countersunk and screwed in place. So I'm just going to let them sit for now. So I'm going to go back to gear leg, I forget what these are called, gear leg stiffeners. So I know I've talked about them before and I've done some video in the past, but I've deleted all of those videos because I couldn't get them to work correctly. And I figured I would just come back to them at some point. I had thought about not using them. I thought about flying the airplane without them and see how it does. And then if I need them, I'd come back and do them. But of course, it's easier to do them now when everything is taken apart and the plane is here at my house rather than out at a hangar somewhere. So I'd rather do the work now. So while I'm waiting on these fairings, I'm going to go back and work on these stiffeners. So I've already made the two stiffeners. This is just 6061 aluminum, I believe. It's nothing special. The width is 1.5 inches. The length, I believe, is 24 or 25. I don't recall. And it's 1/8 of an inch thick. And then you can see that I've got a taper here. This is the lower end. The gear leg fairing itself tapers down the closer you get to the tire. So I had to do the same type of thing on the fairing so that it wouldn't, I had to do the same thing on the stiffener so that it wouldn't interfere with the fairing. So these are both done and cut, and I'm working on the clamps. So I've got a pile of clamps here. These are stainless, and these are all the same. I bought a pack of 15, I think, 15 in a pack from Amazon for like $5. So what I've done, I've started on the one leg, and like I always do, I'm going to work through the process first, and then if it works, I'll come back and videotape as I do the other side for you guys. So here's what I've been doing. These holes, as you can see, the holes in this clamp are mammoth, right? I mean, you could get, geez, I don't know what size that hole is. It's got to be close to 3/8. But anyway, these holes are huge. So what I've been doing is I've been cutting these off. This hard 90-degree bend here, I've been cutting this off completely. This one, I've been cutting off just behind the hole. And then I basically rebend them, and I do not use the cushion. However, as we know that the gear legs are tapered, right? So when you're up at the top by the engine mount, that's where the diameter is the biggest, and then it gets smaller as you go down. What I found out fooling around with this so far is when I cut these holes out, and then I drill my own holes, I can't quite get this to be long enough to wrap around the top of that gear leg and come back together on itself with the stiffener in between. It's just a little too short, and I don't want to compromise edge distance when I re-drill my holes. So for the very top one, I'm actually going to put a couple of washers on either side of the stiffener, because like I said, when the clamp comes around, it won't clamp down all the way. It stops a little short. So I'm going to fill up that gap with some washers. The rest of the clamps, as I work my way down the gear leg, they'll be fine because they're going to be plenty long enough. So that's what I'm working on now. Like I said, as I work through it and I get all this figured out, when I do the other set, I'll do the videotaping. But it's nothing new. I'm not doing anything new or fancy. None of this stuff is my original idea. This has all come from the Vans forums. Over time, people have tried different things and come up with different methods of doing stuff. What kind of clamps to use, what kind of material for the legs and all that stuff. So nothing new. I'm just taking what people have done in the past off of the forums and, trying to do my own thing with it. So there shouldn't be any real surprises when this is all said and done. So I'm going to continue knocking this out. And like I said, when I get it figured out, when I start on the other side, I'll come back and do some video. Here you'll see one of the brackets that I've been working on for these stiffeners. So this is the largest clamp. This is the one closest to the top of the gear leg. And like I said, what I do is I just take one of these clamps and I cut this leg off. This 90-degree leg gets cut off right at the bend. And then this larger hole here gets cut off right across the bottom. Once I have that done, then I lay out my new holes. And the way that I've done it is from the edge of the bracket to the center of the hole is, 5/16. And then from the edge of the bracket to the bend line is 11/16. That seems to work out pretty good for this top bracket. When you go to mark, after you have the hole locations marked, when you go to drill, I put these in a vise, and what I'll do is I'll just bend this open. I'll bend the clamp way open, almost straight, or at least almost a 90-degree angle. And I'll stick this leg in a vise, this top leg in a vise, and drill it. Then I'll flip it over, and I'll put this bottom leg in the vise and drill it. At that point, I'll take the bracket over to the vise, a bigger vise, and I'll clamp it in the vise. I'll clamp the whole end in a vise, just one at a time. I'll clamp this one first, and then I'll bend it by hand on the line, and then I'll flip it over. I'll clamp this ear in the vise on the line, and then I'll bend it over. You can bend these by hand really easily just by pushing on it with your thumb. And like I said, I'll open these up. I'll open them up like that. And then I'll cut the ends, I'll mark the ends, and then I'll put this in a vise. Actually, I'll put it in the vise this way. So this will be opened enough that the drill press chuck can clear it and come down in this orientation. Drill the hole, then I'll flip it over, and I'll have it bent enough so that the chuck can clear it and come down, and drill this hole, and then I'll come back and I'll mark the location for the new hole and the new bend line, and then I'll put this in a vise on the bend line and bend it by hand, flip it over, put this end in the vise on the line, bend it by hand. At that point, what I'll do then is I'll take the clamp itself, and I've taken a digital caliper and I've got a diameter for where the clamp is going to be around the leg. And then I use that same digital caliper on various sockets until I get a socket that is very close to the correct diameter. And then I'll just hand bend the clamp around the socket. And again, these are not my ideas. These are all from various people on the forums that have done this before me. And I'm just kind of doing it using their advice and using their techniques and putting my own little flair on it. So now that I've got this shaped, bent, and drilled, I can now fit it to the leg and fit it to the stiffener. Now I'm going to go back to one that I've got in work. So this is one that I have in work here. What I did was I basically took the length of stiffener and compared it to the length of the actual leg fairing, just to make sure that it fit inside of it lengthwise. And I just made note of, I'm going to back up here. I just made note of how much longer the gear leg fairing is compared to the stiffener. So I know when I have my gear leg fairing in place, and the fairing itself is about a ½ inch from the bottom of the fuselage, it comes all the way down into this curve of the gear leg almost. So I know that the gear stiffener is a lot shorter than that, and I can space it on the leg appropriately. So after I figured that out, I just did a measurement from the engine mount down. I think this measurement from the mount to the center, roughly center of the first clamp, I don't remember, but it's like 4 9/16 or something like that. And then at that point, I just put on a piece of tape, put my clamp around, clamped it to the stiffener. Now, like I said, this particular bracket is just a little too short, and I didn't want to compromise my edge distance. So this is a little too short, and what I ended up doing was putting a couple of thin washers between the bracket and the stiffener to take up that gap. At this point, I can now hold the stiffener in place, and using the holes that I've drilled in it as a guide, I can locate my other pieces of tape for the other brackets, roughly centered off of the hole on the stiffener. The other thing that I found out, which is easy to do, is to make your brackets in pairs. Since I had the length, the appropriate marks for the hole and the bend line, since I knew how to make this particular bracket, I went ahead and made the other one for the other side, rather than doing all of these first and then come back and try to figure out, okay, now this bracket, how long was it? Where did I put the holes? How did I bend it? So I'm going to do them in pairs. This one I've made while everything is still fresh in my mind. I made the other one, which is what I just showed you. So next up, I'll come to this one. I'll do the same thing. I'll measure this with a digital caliper. I'll find an appropriate socket for it. I'll take a bracket, I'll cut the ends off, I'll drill a hole, and then I'll try to wrap it around the socket and figure out where I need to put the other hole. Fit it. Once I get it figured out, I'll make a duplicate for the other side, and then I'll move to the next one. So as you can see, this one is in place. The one that I was just showing you is the one for the other side. So now I'll fit this one to the other side, and then I'll move on. All right, so that's how I'm doing it so far. If I come across anything else important, I'll let you guys know.